Welcome to the ATA podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our new series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. The ATA podcast is designed to deliver news and insights from the American Translators Association. We look at what's happening at ATA, explore the benefits of ATA membership, and discuss the rapidly changing T&I industry. We speak with ATA board members, committee chairs, volunteers, and industry experts. Today's episode is a special one. We're kicking off a new series in collaboration with ATA's Professional Development Committee. It's called Inside Specialization. Members of the PD committee will be interviewing translation and interpreting experts who specialize in a specific field. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. In this first podcast in the series, we spotlight court interpreting. PD Committee Chair Veronika Demichelis talks to our esteemed ATA colleague and interpreting expert Judy Jenner. Find out what it's like to be a court interpreter, what skills you need to have, and hear Judy's advice for working interpreters, translators, and students. If you're new to ATA, our association was founded over 60 years ago to advance the translation and interpreting professions and foster the professional development of individual translators and interpreters. We have nearly 10,000 members in some 100 countries. Members include translators, interpreters, teachers, project managers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. So individuals, organizations, and companies can join the association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, be sure to visit atanet.org and check out past episodes of this podcast. All right, I'll let Veronika take it from here.
Hi, and welcome to this new specialization series on the ATA podcast. My name is Veronika Demichelis, and I am chair of ATA's Professional Development Committee. It is so exciting to bring this new series to life as a special collaboration between the ATA podcast and ATA's Professional Development Program. We're kicking it off with a spotlight on court interpreting, and I am joined today by a special guest and a real advocate for our profession, Judy Jenner. Judy Jenner is a Spanish and German business and legal translator and federally court-certified Spanish interpreter and conference interpreter in Las Vegas. She has an MBA in marketing and runs her boutique translation and interpreting business, Twin Translations, with her twin sister, Dagmar. Judy serves as a spokesperson for the American Translators Association, writes the blog Translation Times, and pens the Entrepreneurial Linguist column for the ATA Chronicle. She is the co-author of The Entrepreneurial Linguist, the Business School Approach to Freelance Translation. Judy teaches interpretation at the University of California, San Diego, and at her alma mater, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Pre-pandemic, she used to fly a lot for her interpreting assignments, and her special talent is trying to memorize airport codes. She's a frequent keynote speaker at T&I conferences around the world. And fun fact, Judy is a cold water swimmer and did a polar bear plunge into the Baltic in Finland in December. Her interpreting claim to fame is having interpreted for then presidential candidate Joe Biden. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you so much, Veronika. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. So let's jump right in and let's start with the basics. What skills do court interpreters need to have?
Great question. As you know, translation and interpreting are two very different things. So oftentimes translators think about making the transition or adding interpreting to their skill set, but you really need different things. Some things are the same, but some are quite different. For example, your memory has to be very, very good. In addition to the obvious language skills, I usually don't include language skills when I talk about court interpreting because, of course, you have to be perfectly bilingual to be an interpreter, court interpreter, any sort of interpreter. The famous line to say that I'm bilingual, so I'm now an interpreter. It couldn't be further from the truth. That's akin to saying I've got two hands, so now I'm a piano player. You do need two hands to be a piano player. That is a minimum requirement. And being perfectly bilingual certainly is a requirement for interpreting. So I usually set that to the side. So memory is a very big issue. Speed is a very important factor, especially in simultaneous interpreting. You have to be somebody who thinks fast, who's quick on his or her feet. And if people have told you all your life that you speak quickly, which in my case certainly has happened, and it wasn't always a compliment. In this case, it certainly is. It helps if you're fast on your feet. You need to be flexible, adaptable. You have to be good at multitasking, because interpreting is one of the most difficult things that cognitively the human brain can do. And especially in simultaneous mode, it seems really impossible to do in the beginning, but it is fascinating that the human brain is capable of doing that. You need to have a good voice, probably. It's something we don't talk about a lot. I still always work on my voice. I've taken some voice lessons, and most interpreters aren't happy with their voice, including yours truly. And you need stamina. It's a physical job in a lot of ways. You have to be on for a long time. You need to be able to withstand not ideal working conditions. You might be standing, you might be trying to bend over. You might be in environments that are very cold or very hot. You may be going to prisons or to courtrooms where it's freezing, etc. And you have to remember that interpreting in a lot of ways is a performance art. You're very visible to everybody. And that's not something that a lot of people like. There's no such thing as being an invisible interpreter. I haven't seen the invisible interpreters yet. So you have to be comfortable with speaking in public, because that's what interpreting is essentially. People are hearing your work in a very public environment most of the time.
Wow, that's a lot. And it's really fascinating. So it sounds like there are some skills that people may sort of check off and say, okay, I got this. But what skills that are specific to court interpreting that one would need to learn?
Maybe not so much skills, but you need a lot of knowledge of the legal system. And the legal language is a language of its own that you wouldn't know probably in either one of your language or languages. So you have to really study that. I've spent a lot of time studying comparative law. I've taken lots of classes on civil procedure, criminal procedure, just to get the lingo in English and to understand the system a bit better. So that's a pretty big project. And I think the most important thing perhaps for court interpreting is to understand that you're not an advocate. You are there to interpret, whether you agree with what's being said or not. So your role is a bit different than in other fields of interpreting, for example, in medical interpreting, community interpreting. And that's not for everyone. So you need to have the skill to distance yourself from what's being said and to focus on doing your job, and to remember that you're not an advocate. If I tell my students that all the time, if you want to advocate for folks, you cannot do that in your role as court interpreter, because we have very strict rules of what we can do as interpreters in court and what we cannot do.
Yeah, that makes sense. These are really important things to consider. So tell us about court interpreting. What does a normal day look like for you, if there is such thing as a normal day?
I was just going to say that there really isn't such a thing as a normal day, and it comes back to being flexible again. If you work in the courts, and either with the courts as your main clients or private clients, which could be law firms or agencies, interpreting agencies, or court reporting firms, you have to expect for things to change all the time. And it has nothing to do with the interpreter personally. It's just the way the legal system works. Things get canceled, the hearings get rescheduled, deponents get sick, trials get rescheduled for the next month because one of the attorneys has a conflict. So you have to be flexible, but you also have to make sure that you really look out for your own business in terms of charging the pertinent cancellation fees and whatnot. So my business is I work for myself. I run my own business, as you said in the intro. So my clients are the courts and private law firms and court interpreting firms. So I try not to take more than 2 or 3 interpreting assignments a day. Now with everything being online because of the pandemic, it's easier to fit in more things. It's actually benefited me. But I do expect as sort of a normal amount of craziness that sometimes I can get a last minute phone call where an attorney says, "We're going to this deposition and I forgot to prepare my client. Can you jump on the phone with us really quickly?" And I do, especially for my great clients. I really make sure I do whatever is necessary within reason, of course. So yeah, it changes all the time. It keeps you on your toes. So if you think in court interpreting you'll have a set schedule that doesn't change all the time as a freelancer, that's probably not the right expectation to have. Sometimes I'm booked a couple of weeks out for specific hearings, but oftentimes it can be pretty last minute.
Yeah. So you mentioned being a freelancer and a small business owner. Is that the case for everyone? Are all court interpreters independent contractors?
Not all of them. There are some in-house positions for court interpreters in the US. They're mainly for the county courts, state courts, and also select jobs at the federal level. Those are in the minority, as is the case for pretty much all in-house translation and interpreting jobs in the US. Most people work for themselves, are independent contractors. Here in Nevada, at the state court level, there are a few in-house interpreters that work a certain amount of hours. Some of them are part-time, some of them are full-time. At the federal courts here in Las Vegas, there's only one full-time in-house interpreter position that an esteemed colleague of mine holds, and I'm their main freelance interpreter, so they call me when they need me. But I would say most of us work for ourselves, so you really have to work pretty hard to build your client base, to find those clients, to keep them happy, and to do a good job.
So let's talk about some pros and cons. What do you like best about court interpreting, and is there something that you don't really like?
Oh, where do I start? There's so many things I love, and of course, there's also room for improvement. I think one of the things I should have mentioned earlier is certification. As a profession, we've fought very, very hard for certification at the state level for a variety of languages, depending on the state, and at the federal level, just for Spanish, which I'm lucky enough to be in that group. So I think it's very important that all interpreters who consider becoming court interpreters, that they pursue certification if it's available in their language. Or the lower level, which is called court registration, which may or may not be available in all states, but it's something that's really, really important because it's been such a struggle to be recognized by the judiciary, to have the interpreters as a recognized profession. So now is our time to really strengthen our profession by emphasizing the importance of certification, especially for the main European languages. Of course, understood that there isn't a certification for the Zulu language in America. It just doesn't exist, right? But if certification is available in your language, I think you should definitely consider that path. So in terms of things that I love about it, I actually love the law. I'm married to a lawyer. My dad's a jurist. I enjoy the solemnity of it. I enjoy sort of the theater of court. It sounds weird, but I actually enjoy wearing a black suit. It's sort of my professional armor, and I feel good about that. I like how predictable in a way it is. There's certain hearings that always follow certain protocols, and it's not that nothing exciting ever happens. That's not the case, but there are some method to the madness. I like that, and I actually enjoy working with lawyers. But that's something that you have to ask yourself before you get into this profession. do you like lawyers? And a lot of my students or newcomers will say, no, I think lawyers are kind of jerks. And I'm like, I hear you. Not everybody likes lawyers. But in my experience, 90% of lawyers are absolutely fantastic to work with. But you have to decide if you like to be surrounded by lawyers. And personally, I do, and I can't escape it. I'm also already at home with one of them. And I like that the role that's been assigned to interpreters has been, formalized in the last few decades, and that we are an essential part of the judiciary, even though we still have a long ways to go with a lot of things of ideal working conditions, better pay. I'm not saying we've arrived, but we're in a much better spot than we were, say, 30 years ago. In terms of what I don't like, the American justice system is imperfect, as any system of justice around the world. So if you go into it thinking that you can change it, you're wrong. A, you can't, and B, that's not your role. So you have to be prepared to be confronted with a level of injustice that you may not like, and that may be hard for you to digest. And you are part of that system, which doesn't mean that you approve all of it, of course, but it's something that you're part of, for better or for worse. And emotionally, sometimes for me, it is pretty hard to see how the system is really stacked against defendants, and how difficult it is to mount a defense here for criminal cases. So that's hard to be the voice that interprets the verdict or interprets the sentencing that's coming through through your voice, right? You're telling the defendant how much time they're going to serve in prison, and that's hard. There's been a lot of tears in court that have never been mine, because I've always been able to maintain a professional demeanor. But I'm not going to lie, it is emotionally draining, and especially on the criminal side. The civil side is easier because we're essentially talking about money. But for criminal cases, when we're talking about people's life and liberty, it can be hard, and I think you have to be emotionally prepared for that it won't all be easy traffic cases. You won't all just be interpreting in traffic court when we're talking about a $100 ticket. There are some real stakes with real lives, and sometimes that's challenging, I'll be honest. Yes.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. Sounds like a rewarding but also challenging field to work in. So,
Yep.
What advice would you give a professional interpreter who is interested in specializing in court interpreting?
Probably going back to what I said earlier about certification, I think your first step would be investigating if certification is available in your state, in your language, or maybe in a neighboring state. Just because, let's say you live in Texas and there isn't a certification for Haitian Creole, maybe you can find where that certification is available, which I believe may be Louisiana, right? So I think it's important to look into that, because you do need some of the training that comes with certification, which is limited. Most of the formal training you'll have to do on your own. There'll be a little bit of training in the form of a workshop for certification. But so that would be my first step. And then look for some courses, some interpreting courses specifically for court. I would suggest looking at a reputable university that offers court interpreter training. I think those are better than a lot of of course, there's very reputable private programs as well, but I think you have to be very skeptical of credentials and promises that we promise that you will pass this exam and whatnot. I think we need to evaluate that very critically and very carefully. And when in doubt, check some of the directories that ATA has for approved programs. So that would be my first advice. Get some real training and understand that getting into court interpreting will be a long and arduous process, especially if you work in a language in which certification is available, which in my case is Spanish. If you think this will be a quick process to maybe earn more money or become an interpreter because that's what you've always wanted to do, but it's not one of those professions where you start making money right away. Even if you pass the certification on the first try, which here in Nevada is very, very rare, only about 3% of people pass it the first time. They'll still take a year from the beginning to the end. So it's a longer process than you'd like. And oftentimes court interpreting is considered the holy grail, for better or for worse, in terms of difficulty level and the terminology. So if you're a beginning interpreter, I usually think it's a bit better to ease into the profession by doing some community interpreting, perhaps some medical. That's also structured, but not as highly structured and as rigid. And the stakes sometimes, well, of course, medical is very important. It's a little bit less formal. So expect to spend some time on this. And as I tell my students, it's going to take hundreds, probably thousands of hours of practice, and a lot of people aren't prepared for that.
Yeah. So how about a working translator who wants to transition into interpreting? Is court interpreting a specialization that they could consider getting into?
Absolutely, and actually that's what I did about 10 years into my translation career. I'd always admired interpreters from afar. I thought, wow, wouldn't that be great if I could do that? But I can't possibly do it. I can't think that fast. I'm a translator. I spend lots of time thinking about each word. But there came a point where I thought I wanted to do something. I wanted to do it. I wanted to see if I could challenge myself. And I just thought I'll sign up for a 40-hour medical interpreting course called Bridging the Gap with a great interpreter trainer, Tracy Young, who's since become a very good friend of mine. She's very well known in the medical interpreter community. So I signed up for that workshop. I was very scared. And turns out I had some talent. But I also learned that I didn't really like medical that much, that just wasn't, I didn't see myself going to the hospital or the clinics. And the same question you have to ask yourself for legal, I asked myself for medical, do I want to spend my working days in the hospital or in a clinic? And the answer for me was not really. So I used medical to build my skills a bit, and then got into court interpreting. So that's what I would do. I'd find some relatively accessible course to get started and sort of ease into it a bit. But you also have to ask yourself, is interpreting something that works for my skill set? You have to take a hard, honest look at your skills. And if some of them you can obviously learn, nobody is born an interpreter. Nobody. Everybody learns it. Some people have more talent than others. And I like to make analogies with sports because I used to be a competitive athlete, which drives everybody crazy. But it's just like playing tennis, right? Some people have a lot more talent than others. You still have to work hard. And some people work really hard and don't have a lot of talent. And eventually they get there because they compensate with the hard work. But if you have a lot of talent and you don't do the hard work, that's also not that useful. So you need to be willing to suffer and to really truly understand that interpreting isn't anything like translation. That really, language skills, of course, are the basis of both, but the skills aren't really that transferable. I didn't really feel like I had a leg up because I'd been a translator for so many years, and it was humbling. And when I first heard folks interpreting in court, when I did my observation hours, because you have to go for 40 hours and do observing, and I just remember staring at these interpreters in absolute awe. And I thought, there's no way it's impossible. It's magic. It absolutely seemed like magic to me. And I remember writing on my notepad, I wrote, it's magic. And I thought I can never get there. But just like everybody, I put in the hard work, and yes, you can get there.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you for that advice. So finally, what advice would you give a student who is studying language or translation and interpreting and is interested in a career as a court interpreter?
Probably to learn as much about the law as you can. Of course, nobody expects you to be an expert. You're not a lawyer. You're not giving legal advice. You're not a paralegal. But the more you understand about the system, the more comfortable you'll feel in certain hearings. And in the beginning, you'll still be incredibly intimidated because the court administrator will say, go to this room and do this interpreting for this tenant-landlord dispute, and you're just thinking, oh, how do I say tenant in my language? I've never done a landlord dispute, and you're walking and you just horrified. You're thinking, what terminology could possibly come up? I don't have any idea. So there'll be a lot of anxiety there, but the more you know, the better it will feel. And I think you have to be honest with yourself and just understand that you won't know everything. It's impossible. It took me a long time to accept that I'm not a walking dictionary, that once in a while during a 5-hour deposition, there may be a word that I don't know. And to say that and to admit that is hard for a lot of people. So yeah, learn as much as you can about not so much the terminology in both languages, but just the general overview. And I think the best advice I've gotten about beginning in court is to do those observation hours early. Even if you don't get credit or you haven't taken a specific part of the exam yet, just go to court and expose yourself to it. Listen to what happens in court, because it's nothing like Judge Judy. It's nothing like it. And I hadn't really spent significant time in court before I started training for this. So I think before you start exploring court interpreting, just spend a couple hours in court. Everything is pretty much open to the public, except for some juvenile cases, family cases. So you can just waltz in and sit down and be an observer. As long as you're quiet and don't play with your phone, they're usually happy to have you. So that would be some of my advice in a nutshell.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you for your advice and for sharing your experience and tips on this absolutely amazing specialization of interpreting.
My pleasure. We definitely need more court interpreters, more certified court interpreters as a country for all languages. So if you're interested, I definitely encourage you to start exploring, and to maybe one day you'll be my colleague, to those of you listening. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Judy.
You've been listening to Veronika Demichelis speak with Judy Jenner. Veronika currently serves as director on the ATA board and chair of ATA's Professional Development Committee. Judy Jenner is an ATA spokesperson and federally certified Spanish interpreter. This episode was produced in collaboration with members of ATA's Professional Development Committee. Big thanks to my colleagues on the committee. This new series would have never hit the airwaves without their initiative and passion. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platz. The music you heard today was produced by Ben Sound. Mary David and Rashan Pacarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. If you like today's podcast, please hit the subscribe button and be sure to share it with a colleague or a friend. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast, please be sure to leave us a rating. And we'd love to hear what you think of this first episode in the Inside Specialization series. Please write to me and share your thoughts. If there's a particular specialization you'd like to know more about, mention that too. You can reach me at podcast@atanet.org. And if you're interested in joining ATA, or you want to know more about the association, be sure to visit ATA's website, atanet.org, follow ATA on social, and check out the past episodes of this podcast. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.